all of the big economic forecasting units, whenever they give you a debt ratio and a debt level for Scotland, we are in the top 10 in the world because of our economic performances. So our currency would have been a strong currency. We're not in Europe any longer, so the idea of our own currency is now an idea which has arrived. So it will be our own currency. I said more or less what you were telling us was we'll have a slimmed down monarchy. And I said to everybody I was speaking to, I'm not interested in putting the royal family on a diet. I just want rid of them. I don't want any of them to have any say over anything that happens democratically in Scotland. For me, the people are sovereign. Every law that's passed in Scotland, it needs to go to get royal assent. I'm sorry, the people vote. That's it. You should have sent something for royal assent. Well, I was going to say something, never mind that. So I didn't want them on any diet, any slim fast. I just wanted rid of them.
Hello, Tommy. Welcome back, mate. I really appreciate you coming in again to do this.
No problem, Paul. Your shows are stimulating. They inspire a lot of discussion, some good stories. You've had some great guests, so it's a privilege to be invited back.
I know, thanks. Stephen was in last week, one of your old colleagues of the council. He said to say hello. I meant to say that actually. So,
great.
So it's obviously the 10-year sort of anniversary for sort of independence referendum, Tommy. And I know you've got your rally in George Square on the 14th of September. I think it is to sort of coincide with it. So maybe we just start with there and then see where we go.
Yeah, that's great, Paul, because we've got very little opportunity to talk about events that are grassroots led in terms of the independence struggle. It's called a struggle for a reason, because you're trying to overthrow centuries of British rule, and anybody that thought that was going to be easy is in for a rude awakening. Of course it's a struggle. There's ups and there's downs, and obviously 10 years ago we had a fantastic opportunity because we had the opportunity to write a new chapter in the future of Scotland, because if we had got rid of Westminster, then we would have been able to plough our own field. We would have been able to choose our own priorities. We wouldn't have been the same militaristic, chauvinistic nation that Britain is. We would have been a country that I think would have prioritised care and hospitals and schools instead of nuclear weapons and military aid to juntas across the world, and allowing billionaires to pay whatever they want to pay in taxation. I think we would have been a country that would have struck a very, very clear marker for fairness. Now, personally, I would want to build a socialist Scotland. That would have been my desire, an independent socialist Scotland where the wealth, the oil, the gas, the electricity, the land, all of which we've got in abundance, is owned and controlled by the people of Scotland and used for the benefit of the people of Scotland. I think the standard of living in Scotland could be incredible. We're not talking about bringing people down. We're talking about raising people up. That's what Scotland had the potential to do. And many countries across the world had to fight for their independence from Britain with violent means, because Britain wasn't willing to let them go because they were exploiting their natural resources. They weren't prepared to allow them of their independence. Some of them had to pick up arms to get their independence. We didn't have to pick up arms. All we had to do is pick up a wee pencil. And unfortunately, although 45% of the population did vote for it, which, let's never lose sight of the background, Paul, that when we started around about 2013, only 30% were for independence. So we went from 30 to 45. And the truth is, this time, this is the 1st of September, this time 10 years ago, all of the polls were indicating that we had a chance of winning, that we were slightly ahead. What then happened was panic. The British establishment panicked. They had emergency meetings at Downing Street. They pulled in the bosses of the banks, the B&Qs of the world, the Tesco's, the shipyards. They even brought in Obama, they brought in Putin, they brought in the Chinese Premier. Go and check it 10 years ago. Every one of them were put on the telly saying how wonderful Britain was and how it would be wrong to break up Britain. Shipyard workers were receiving letters telling them that their jobs weren't safe if they voted yes. You had Barclays Bank saying they were going to withdraw from Scotland. You had Tesco's threatening to close their stores. It was enormous, the fear that was created because Scotland was going to vote yes. And but for the fear that was generated around pensions, which is a bit ironic nowadays, but we had Project Fear telling pensioners, if you vote for independence, you'll not get your pension. And it was just lies. It was just utter, pure lies. The reason I say it's ironic is because we've now got a Labour government taking away the winter fuel payment for pensioners. You know, it just shows you how ridiculous everything has become. People used to say to me, Paul, Tommy, you can't tell us that things are going to be better in an independent Scotland. It's a big dark hole. How can you possibly ask us to vote for something when we can't be sure about it? And I used to say, listen, I'm telling you this, there's water in the pool. I might not be able to tell you how deep it is, but there's water in the pool. I'm asking you to jump in because there's enough water in the pool. But I'll tell you what I can say, is if you don't vote for independence, things will get worse. I'm guarantee you things will get worse, because the economic situation is such that they will continue to super exploit us. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, workers' living standards will fall. You're going to have decades of Tory government. They dragged us out of the European Union. I hate the European Union, I couldn't care less about it, but the point is Scotland voted to stay in it, but they get dragged out against their will. So what I was arguing for 10 years ago, and I'm arguing for the day, isn't something that is ultimately radical or militant. It is simply, Paul, that you get the government you vote for. Now, what is so wrong about that? Get the government you vote for. It's like a wee birdie in a cage. Somebody opens the cage door and you say to the wee birdie, you're free. And the wee birdie's too frightened to come out the cage. That's what we were. We were too frightened to come out the cage. And that's what upset me. So, Saturday, 14th September, we'll be gathering in George Square. We have done for the last 10 years, hope over fear. And we'll be gathering to say, the dream will never die. And the struggle goes on, because we believe independence is absolutely critical to a new and a better Scotland.
Aye, no, that's interesting. I like your wee analogy about the pool. I've not heard that before. So maybe if we circle back, we'll go back in time a wee bit, Tommy, and maybe we could sort of summarise like what led to the independence referendum, right? Because as you pointed out there, it was sort of always about 30% sort of people wanting independence. And then, like, what do you think was the sea change round about that time to contribute towards the sort of SNP landslide as it was at the time, and then the agreement to have a referendum on the independence question?
Well, I think what was very significant was the Scottish Parliament election results. The 2007 Scottish Parliament voted the SNP into power. That wasn't supposed to happen, because the way the Scottish Parliament had been established, particularly by the Scottish Convention and the unionist parties, the Tories, Labour and the Liberals, who designed the Scottish Parliament, they designed it with a view to having enough of a PR element that the unionists would always be able to keep out the nationalists. That's just the fact. That's the way they designed it. They thought that the Scottish Parliament would kill independence. In actual fact, the Scottish Parliament gave a huge fillip to the whole idea of independence. It encouraged people to think, well, we actually can manage our affairs. So although 99, 2003, you had clear unionist governments, Labour and Liberal governments, and they governed as unionists. I can remember 2002 as an MSP bringing in a bill to give free and healthy school meals to every kid in Scotland. I looked at Finland, I'd studied Finland. They had done it for years. Their health statistics had rocketed, their dietary problems had plummeted. All of the socio-economic barriers that you have with a means-tested system were eliminated, because you don't get poor kids feeling psychologically attacked because they're having to stand in queues where everybody can see that they're the poor ones. They're getting free school meals. So this idea emanates from looking at what's happening in other countries, introduce it, get the support of whole of Civic Scotland, all the single parent groups, all the anti-poverty groups, all the trade unions, supported it. By the way, supported it even though it was me that promoted it, because I'm not always the most popular of characters, but the idea was so strong, and I managed to get a Labour MSP and a SNP MSP to co-sponsor it. I got John McCallion from Labour, I got Alec Neil from SNP, and we campaigned for it, and we got the Child Poverty Action Group, we got STEC Women's Committee, we got Gingerbread, we got all of these groups seen it as a very, very strong anti-poverty, pro-equality measure that would help tackle not just poverty but also dietary health problems. Goes to the Parliament, and Labour, the Tories and the Liberals unite to vote it down. Right. The reason I mention that is because nowadays the Liberals say, oh, we're for free school meals. Labour say, oh, we're for free school meals. But when they had the chance to do anything about it, they were against free school meals.
And if the press is to believe, they're talking about this is going to come back off the table again because of the amount of cuts that they're going to have to hand down. And I think it came up when John McKendrick was in here, like, if that Scottish Parliament is there to pass down cuts that come from Westminster, then there's no fucking point in having the Parliament now.
Listen, if all you're doing is electing people to put on some silk gloves while they punch you in the face, what is the use of the Scottish Parliament? The Scottish Parliament, people thought, was going to be a buffer. It was going to be the ability for Scotland to do things differently. We've got control of education, we've got control of health, we've got control of transport, we've got control of planning. These are big, big areas of people's lives. We've got control of housing, huge areas in people's lives. Let's do things differently. And the truth is, if you think of the situation with student tuition fees, if you think of prescription charges, if you look at road tolls, these are all measures Scottish Parliament does differently. We don't charge students to go to university. We don't charge sick people to pay for the prescriptions. That's great, that's progressive. All of it's going to come under attack now. All of it. Because Labour's in power, and all you've done is you've changed from the Tories' first 11 to the Tories' second 11. That's all that's happened here. These people, and you know what, Paul, I actually dislike Starmer personally and politically more than even Sunak and Johnson. Sunak and Johnson are ratbags, absolute ratbags, baw bags as we would call them here in Glasgow. But they're ratbags and baw bags that we know what they are. They're Tories. They're Tories through and through. You expect nothing more, nothing less for them. This Starmer comes in, and of course it's in the name, sir. Anybody that accepts a knighthood for the British establishment, you've got to have suspicions about if they want to change society. Change society? They're part of society. They're part of the establishment. And he's come in and he's going to do absolutely the same as the Tories would have done. And of course the winter fuel cut, the refusal to take away the 2 benefit cap, all of that is working class measures which will affect the working class more than anybody else. And we don't live in a poor country, Paul. See, if you lived in a poor country, you would say to yourself, oh, I'm awful sorry, look, there's the pie. It's a wee small pie. You can only get a wee piece of it. We've got a huge pie, massive pie. It's just that the rich are getting a massive bit of it and we're getting left to fight out of the crumbs, and that's not good enough.
Aye, maybe we can talk about the pie then, because I wonder about this sometimes in independent sort of debate. It doesn't seem as though people ask the question, what have Westminster and the establishment down there got by remaining in this political union? Like, why are they so keen to fight for Scotland? They got all this push about they love the country and the landscape and all the rest of it, but there's other reasons, isn't there?
Paul, it's absolutely clear, and anybody with a semblance of intelligence, even just a couple of active brain cells, would understand that if we were subsidised by Westminster, if we were a drain on the British economy, they would have cut us off decades ago. The reason they oppose independence isn't because of any patriotism towards Britain or the UK as an entity. It's simply because Scotland subsidises the British economy. Without Scotland, the British economy is broken. Without our oil, our gas, our food and beverages income, Britain would fail to pay the bills. It's just as simple as that. And people need to wake up to the reality. Every time you hear them economically, oh, Scotland would have such a big debt if they were on their own. What they're not doing is comparing Scotland's potential debt with what Britain's already got as a debt. We've got a huge debt, but debts aren't the problems for governments. People have to get out of this economic claptrap. Thatcher sort of convinced people to think, oh, well, the economy's just like your household, and households can't live beyond their means. What a lot of shite. Households can't print money. Hence, households can't produce more revenue. Governments can. Governments can decide how much money they print, how much money they spend. They can decide how much money they pay back. All of that is what government is all about. And anybody, I despise the United States of America, but it's held up as the most powerful economy in the world. It's the most debt-ridden economy on the planet, but it's held up as the big model. But here in Scotland, oh no, you can't have independence because you would have debt. Of course you would have debt. Debt's not a problem as long as you can manage it. And we would more than manage our debt. We would be able to invest in the future the same way Norway has done, the same way Finland has done. Norway in particular, using their oil resources. We've got oil resources more than them. We could invest. And by using the oil resources now, what you do is you invest in clean technology, clean energy production. We have, with our climate, with our land mass, we have the potential to become the Saudi Arabia of clean energy production, because we have in abundance wind and wave and solar power. We have it in abundance. If you invest publicly, you could become the leading world power in clean technology. What are we doing? We're giving it to private business and asking them to invest, and they'll get all the benefits, but we'll get all the costs. That's what, think about it. That's what capitalism's all about. Capitalism is socialism for the corporations, capitalism for the working class. They always make sure they privatise the profits, but they want to make sure everybody else shares the costs. That's what corporatism, capitalism is all about.
I know, I said a couple of things in there. So about the printing money, it's not technically true, because when my mate prints money, he gets 5 to 10 years, so it can be it can be done, Tommy. And what was the other thing I was going to say? America, I read this the other day, I found this quite interesting. So America's got something like 15 to 20% of the world's population, but they've got 40% to 50% of the world's wealth. So that seems like a bit of an imbalance. But Bernie Sanders, when he was talking, was saying that it's like half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So again, the money is obviously concentrated in the hands of a few, clearly.
Absolutely. I mean, when we meet in the square on the 14th September, Paul, we'll be asking people to examine their lives and examine the situation that we're in. Is independence something that's worth still fighting for? You know, some people have taken decisions that it's no worth it any longer because they've exhausted themselves mentally, physically. They've tried. They feel as though they're hitting their heads against a brick wall. And I can understand that. I'm not going to condemn people. I'm going to ask other people who haven't taken up the fight yet to get involved. And I'm going to ask them that are involved in the fight to keep fighting. Because in Scotland, and we have to look at it, I always think local, act local. Obviously, we've got a global outlook on life. We're no better than anybody. We don't try and pretend that we are the blessed or the chosen people. But if Scotland could utilise its wealth, its resources, and actually invest in better healthcare, better education, develop our communitarian, caring society, the ethos that exists in Scotland. I mean, Scotland's a different country. We don't vote Tory. You know, people have to get this into their heads. We don't vote Tory. I used to say all the time, Paul, that when people were looking for guarantees about independence, I said, I'll give you one guarantee. there'll never be another Tory government. Because Scotland doesn't vote Tory. It's just as simple as that. We hadn't done it since 1955, before I was born, before you were born. We won't do it again. That's a guarantee that you could give. And I would argue that big fight for independence has to be beyond party politics, has to be beyond individuals. It has to rise to the level of being a movement, a cause, which unites people across politics, across personalities. It's not about Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond, it's not about the SNP, it's not about Tommy Sheridan. It's about your grandwains. What are they going to grow up in? What type of Scotland do you want them to grow up in? Is it going to be a Scotland committed to militarism and spending scarce resources on nuclear weapons, or is it a Scotland that says, no, we need some more MRI machines, we need some more schools, we need some more hospitals? That's the Scotland I want, no the Scotland that they're giving us.
Aye, let's get into that then, because one of the things I did want to ask you about was like, what was the significance of the groups like the Radical Independence Campaigners, groups like yourself, obviously, sort of Hope Over Fear? I want to know, if there's another referendum, right, how's it going to be won? Is it going to be won on the big TV debates? Is it going to be won in the SACC when Nicola Sturgeon walks out in front of tens of thousands of her own party members? Or is it going to be won in pubs and wee town halls and wee things like that? All that stuff that was sort of spontaneously springing up during the referendum campaign.
Paul, I'm trying to remember when the Scottish National Party was formed. I think it was in the 20s, 1922 or something like that. And between that period, for certainly over 80 years of its existence, the SNP had a route to independence that didn't mention a referendum. The SNP's route to independence was the same route that most other nationalist movements develop when they talk about using the ballot box. In other words, you vote for it at a ballot box. If enough people voted SNP, this is what Mrs Thatcher said, sorry for swearing on your show, but she said the route to independence for Scotland is quite simple. If you send a majority of MPs to Westminster who support independence, then you can have it. That was what she said in the 80s. And that was the SNP's position. That was everybody's position. Alec then wins a majority in 2007. Sorry, not a majority. It was a workable minority government. He then wins a full majority in 2011. The Cameron government looks at the situation and thinks, well, wait a minute, this is...
I think he put it on the what do they call it, the fucking prospectus? When
the manifesto.
Manifesto.
They wanted a referendum. If they could win a majority, they wanted a referendum. Cameron looks at that. They win a majority in 2011. Salmond was a very canny politician, very clever, and Cameron looks at the opinion polls and thinks, give them the referendum. They're only at 30%. Some of the polls say 25%. I remember reading the social attitude survey in the Guardian, 25% support independence. Scotsman poll said around about 30%. Give them the referendum. And that was a sop to the 2007 and the 2011 Scottish Parliament election results. So we had a referendum. Up until that point, the SNP's position was a majority in a Westminster election. Scottish Parliament was new. Winning a majority in the Scottish Parliament was certainly new. So that's how we got the referendum. We got the referendum because they thought we had no chance of winning it. There's not going to be another referendum. Westminster knows now. It's running at 50-50. Regardless of whatever poll you look at now, Paul, regardless of where the campaign is, when you ask the question to people now, would you support Scottish independence? It is roughly 50-50. That's too much of a gamble for the British establishment. They can't get another referendum when it's already running at 50-50, in the knowledge that when it was at 30% and then we had a referendum, it went to 45%, so it went up 15% in the course of a campaign. If it's running at 50-50, what's the chances it going up 7, 8, 10%? Big chance. So from my point of view, I think the independence movement has to return to a strategy that is based in the ballot box. I think what we need to do at every election now, we say those parties that believe in independence, if their collective vote is 50% plus, then that is the signal for independence. And as long as that's known, you can't, say, oh, by the way, we get 51% of the election votes that were counted for independence. We're declaring independence. When you never told people beforehand, you need to declare it. And it needs to be there front and foremost. It's similar to the Sinn Féin position in the 1919 election. It's similar to other nations that have got their independence via putting it on the ballot box. The Estonias, the Latvias, all of them used ballot boxes. And as long as they get 50% plus, they declare their independence. So for me, let's forget the fairy tale of another referendum, because it's not going to happen. None of the British establishments now learn. That's what they do. They learn that it's too close to call. Therefore, you're not getting a referendum. We need to go via the general election.
No, I take your position, and this is the first time I've heard that sort of being proposed. But if we go back to like what we were talking about earlier, like, is it realistic now? Because it seems like the independence movement is fractured, and the party who were able to get to the point of getting the referendum sort of agreed. I don't know how they're going to do. The polls are not looking too good collectively, I think, for the independence sort of movement. So I think it's probably hard to persuade people to vote for independence when this movement that was united is now so fractured. And I know that Better Together, obviously, are not in cahoots anymore, but their position's not changed, right? They're all still saying that they would vote to remain as part of this political union. So I think that makes that proposition maybe a wee bit unattractive and difficult.
It's definitely difficult, Paul. We have to call spades spades. When you have got a situation that we have politically just now, where the SNP's lost its way in a big way. I think the SNP as a political force was formed with a cause in mind, and that cause was independence. And yet, over the last decade or so, they've done everything but fight for independence. Since the 2014 referendum, they have had opportunities the likes of which the founders of the SNP would have given literally the right arms for. 2015 general election, 56 out of 59 MPs, 56 out of 59. We sent them down there. Now, it was reduced to 35 in 2017, but then it went back up to 41 in 2019. 41 out of 59. It's a majority. What did we do? We prevaricated. We talked about stopping Brexit. England had voted for Brexit. Imagine we voted for independence and everybody in England built their campaign around stopping independence. We'd have been outraged. How dare we talk about stopping Brexit when England had voted for it? That should have been the opportunity to say, OK, guys, you have voted for that, we're off. We've got the majority here. And then they develop this obsession with gender identity politics, Paul. Obsession. A piece of politics that is in nobody's agenda in the working class estates of Scotland, who are worried about cost of living, the price of rents and mortgages and food. Obsession about someone who wants to change their gender, who have got the law on their side via the Equality Act of 2010. They have got a protected characteristic. They've got a route to change their gender, and if they need support, we give them support. No, that's not good enough. We want to take it from the age of 18 and we want to lower it to 16. So that now when you're 16, you can decide to take a decision of the enormity of changing your gender. 16. I don't know about you, Paul, but see, when I was 16, mate, I didn't know much about what the future was and what my life was going to be about. All I was interested in was playing football and chasing lassies and going out with my mates. I didn't know about big decisions like that. I'm certainly glad I wasn't allowed to take big decisions like that. How dare the Scottish Parliament turn around now and say, at 16, you're mature enough to take a decision like that. And by the way, you don't need any doctors or medical input. Just say it. Just identify, self-identify. And you who were born a boy, you can now be a girl. Absolute pish, Paul, pish. Biological nonsense, defying science. And that's what the SNP government was devoted to in its last 5 years. I remember having Pauline McNeill, Labour MSP, on a show that I was doing in Edinburgh, and she was telling me about her private rent protection bill. It was a private member's bill that she was trying to get through Parliament to protect those who were living in the private rented sector who were getting hammered with increases in rents. So she'd introduced this measure to prevent large increases in rents in the private landlord sector because they were taking advantage of a lack of accommodation to increase the rents. And I said, but Pauline, that's a great idea. Why did it not get supported? And she says there wasn't time in the parliamentary timetable to discuss it. And I thought to myself, we've got time for wee lasses or wee boys to be apparently mature enough to change their gender at the age of 16, but we've not got time to protect families from massive rent increases. That's how much the SNP lost its way.
Aye, well, I think if you look at the percentages, like, I think it's whatever it is, I forget the percentage, it's quite low, obviously, the people who would like to go through, some sort of...
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%, there you go. And how many people in this country are privately renting? Don't know, 20%, 30%, something like that.
It's actually now 50%. For the first time in Scotland's history, it's over 50%, Paul. Why? Because local authorities have given up managing houses. When's the last time you met somebody who lived in a council house? Councils don't produce houses anymore. What they did is they sold them all off. Most Glasgow local authorities, now housing associations, Inverclyde housing associations, big local authorities that used to run and manage houses, you and I were brought up in them, they don't do it anymore. So more and more families have been forced into the private rented sector. Why? Because a lot of people thought to themselves, these council houses are going quite cheap. I'm going to buy one. Oh, by the way, buy one, maybe why don't you buy two? Why don't you buy three? Why don't you buy 10? Before you know it, houses that used to be in the public sector are now in the private sector, owned by private landlords who are making a packet out of it. And because of the lack of rental controls, the private rents are going through the roof, and families have now got a higher percentage of their income going in their rent than ever before.
Aye, let's get into that then, because this has been a bit of a theme recently. So I talked about this with Stephen Purcell last week, and he had admitted obviously the council had sold it off, and they were banned from reinvesting that money into new stock by the Tories apparently. But I don't know what Labour did differently when they came in, to be fair. I never pressed them on that. Maybe I'll get them back in, talk about that again. But in Scotland, they've set up an investment bank, and they're very proud of this. Some of the sort of ministers there. How can they not set up a fucking national house building company? I said this to somebody the other day. What do you need to build a house? You need cement, you need bricks, you need wood, you need windies, you need boilers. Is that not the kind of thing that a Scottish government should be looking to invest in and have a stake? They can sell it privately for a wee bit of profit to private companies, and they can use the rest themselves just to build houses, whatever it is, 20,000 a year, 10,000 a year, and then maintain. We'll have a certain level of housing stock in this country, and then we'll borrow against that, right? I don't know whether it's going to be a Scottish owned bank or whatever, but there has to be ways to say, we own this land, we own these properties. Can you give us some money to fund other stuff like schools and shops and libraries and all that sort of carry on?
Paul, not only are you on the right track, but you're underselling it, because you talked there about what you need to build houses, and you talked about the raw materials. But what else do you need to build houses? You need brickies, you need joiners, you need draftsmen, you need the services of plumbers, you need people to plan, you need labourers. The economic equation, last time I looked at it, was for every pound that you invest in construction, you generate at least another £10 because of the employment that you create. And from my point of view, a national house building corporation, which is what I support, would be able not only to identify areas of the country where there are housing shortages, and that's everywhere, not only identify land which is vacant and available, and that's everywhere, they would also be able to invest in employment. When people talk about lack of jobs, well, why would we have a lack of jobs if we were building more houses? We wouldn't have any. Like, what you would have is a lack of employees. You would need to open up doors to people from Europe and people from other parts of the world. I don't mind doing that, as long as, and this is the whole point about immigration and the reason why immigration becomes a political football, is because employers use immigration not to improve society, but to undercut workers in the indigenous country, so that you'll get people getting brought in to do jobs and given lower rates of pay, less economic protection. See, as long as you have a uniform playing field so that the rate of pay, the rate of employment protection is across the board, there's no way that other people can undercut you. You're only bringing other people into your country because you've got a shortage in your own country. That's what we do. We don't attack people for the non-existent crime of wanting to improve their lives by coming to another country. What you do is you attack employers who are making billions of pounds by paying less to people from other parts of the world to employ them and take other people's jobs. That's what you have to undercut. It's not the victims of poverty you attack. It's those that cause poverty, which are the billionaires. So from my point of view, building more houses not only addresses an absolute huge economic need. What do you have if you don't have a house? What do you have if you don't have that security? And by the way, I'm not talking about owning your house, because house ownership is fine. If that's what you want to do, fine. But we've got to remember, it's only in the last 2 or 3 decades that Britain's became a home-owning country. Because up until then, most people lived in local authority homes. Go across Europe, whether it be Norway, whether it be Denmark, whether it be Sweden, the overwhelming majority don't own their homes. They rent. And therefore, we have to get away from this idea. And it's an idea because we've got so many other lack of opportunities for wealth accumulation. This idea that the only way as a working class family to leave anything for your kids is to buy a house, because that's, you can't leave anything else. You're no earning enough money. But if you buy a house, well, you could leave that for them. Problem is nowadays, sometimes you're not leaving, you're leaving as debt. Rather than an asset.
Aye, half it, something gets taxed, I don't know, does it, as well when it sells. But also, what I would say is, from my own personal experience, I can talk to here, it's a trap almost. You kind of get trapped into this, right? Because you don't want to rent because you're thinking, I'm paying some other cunt's mortgage, basically. So then what you're thinking, well, I'll need to buy somewhere, just so that you're no kind of frittering that money away. But I don't know, psychologically back in the day, it didn't feel like that. When it was a council house, it was your house, you weren't really worried, everybody decorated it, and I don't know whether they knew maybe one day I'm going to own this, or my kids are going to inherit this anyway, whatever it was maybe that. So I feel that the home ownership has only gone up in this country because of people like me who just feel like you've not really got any other avenue. But if there was good social housing, then maybe you'd think, fuck it, I'll not buy that house, and that money can go to holidays and whatever else.
Paul, you've hit the nail on the head. It's all about opportunities. What is the alternative to owning your house? If the alternative is getting screwed in the private rented sector, getting screwed for a house, by the way, which isn't even adequate in terms of the number of bedrooms and the lack of a garden, all these things, then of course you'll do whatever you can to manufacture a mortgage. You'll inflate your wages, you'll work overtime to get your top line looking better than it actually is. You'll get yourself into a position where, I can't really afford it, but I'll take that mortgage and then I'll work every single opportunity for overtime. Oh, wait a minute, I thought you were doing it for the Waynes. When are you going to spend time with the Waynes? Oh, right, I can't spend time with the Waynes because I'm working too much. Where is the work-life balance? It is an economic rat race, and it's a downward spiral. I think the wheels are coming off it. They already come off in 2008. The reason the economic crash developed, nothing to do with pensioners or immigrants or the poor, everything to do with the rich trying to get more and more money by throwing mortgages at people who couldn't afford to pay them, and eventually the property was worthless. That's happened. The banks then called in some of the property and found, oh, wait a minute, nobody can pay for these things. It's worthless pieces of property. The market crashed on the basis of that worldwide. Apparently it's recovered. I mean, remember, very, very few people who did that suffered for it, apart from places like Finland, who actually jailed, quite rightly, the profiteers.
Iceland as well, I think.
Iceland and Finland did the business. But you've got a situation now where we have the banks telling us, I just read an article the other day, that one of the top lenders is now willing to go back to an equation that they used to adopt before 2008, and that is to lend up to 5 times the income of the applicant. Now, after the crash, these things all get restricted to like 2.5 times, so that if your income was 30,000 a year, then the most that you could borrow would be 75,000, because single, unless you went for a double mortgage, a couple, but on a single basis. But now if you're on 30,000 a year, they're talking about, oh, well, we'll let you borrow 150,000. How can you pay back that level of mortgage? How can you sustain that level of payment? People at the time don't think about it because, as you say, the demand to get something is so high. So for me, the whole market has to be re-regulated. We have to address the housing shortage through public house building, and we have to give realistic alternatives to purchasing a home. If people could live in good quality rented accommodation, that's what they'll choose to do. And anybody who thinks I'm wrong, as I say, go and look at Europe, and you will see that across Europe, the overwhelming majority of people don't purchase homes, they rent homes.
Spain's got quite a high rental population. I don't know what the numbers are, but one of my mates stays over there, and it was something that was sort of telling me. What about, Tommy, we go back again, because you were obviously up and down the country right during the independence sort of campaign there. You must have some stories, like either like your funnest story, your most memorable sort of occasion during that referendum period, if you can go back in time there.
Paul, my memories during the independence referendum are absolutely legion, and they're all overwhelmingly positive because, I remember the last week of the campaign going out to Fir Park to speak at the Motherwell Social Club next to the ground. And as was the case in these meetings at that time, we had to have an overflow meeting because there was the hall only held 300. There was another 150, 200 out in the street. And I actually had to ask a guy if it was his car, because he was standing close to it. And he said, aye. And I said, look, mate, would you mind if I stood on the roof of your motor? And he was like, no problem, no problem. So they put down a flag, put down a salt tire for me to stand on top of the roof. And we addressed 150, 200 people out in the street before getting into the actual meeting. Same happened in Dundee, Caird Hall. Now, that was, I think it was 500 or 600 in the hall. Fantastic attendance, but fire and safety, they wouldn't let anybody else in, so I had to go out to the steps of Caird Hall to address another 200. Same in Aberdeen, big hotel in Aberdeen, they were only allowed 250 in, another 200 out in the steps in the street in Aberdeen. It was no wonder then. By the way, I remember the other one was Victoria's, the infamous dance hall in Glasgow. Somebody had booked Victoria's, and it held, I think it was 400 or 450, but there was too many people. So what we did is there was 2 levels. We ended up having to book the level below as well. So I was going up and down the stairs, addressing 2 different meetings. This is in the last week before the 18th of September. And therefore that's what fed the enthusiasm for my belief that we were going to win. I spoke in the Andrew Neil show the last weekend before the referendum, and I says to him, we're going to win. You're going to be smiling in the other side of your face, because he was a pompous ass, going on and on about the unionist ideas and the economy. These are guys that don't have a clue what it takes to struggle to make ends meet, and trying to tell us about what was best for people. However, we came up short, unfortunately. And as I said earlier, Paul, some people are exhausted. I can understand that. But as I said at the start, it's not called a struggle for nothing. A struggle means it's a struggle. You'll have good days, you'll have bad days. But do you believe in the cause of independence? Does independence mean something to you? Does the idea of controlling your own resources, controlling your own destiny, does that mean something to you? See, if it does, you need to keep fighting for independence. Never give up, never give in is the motto that we need to adopt. I remember during all the meetings, I used to come on in my chosen song. It's a bit like a boxing contest. You come onto the stage and it was always a song. And mine was Labby Sifri. Something inside so strong. When they tell us we're not good enough, we look them in the eye and say, we're going to do it anyway. And that's the spirit that has to fire us up and take us forward in this next few months and years, Paul.
Aye, no, fair play. What about, we'll go to the here and now then, Tommy. Like, what is going to be the big arguments? Like we said earlier that you were your plan, it sounds like, is that the independence movement needs to unite. There needs to be kind of front, and there needs to be some unity to sort of take this forward. So have you been reaching out to folk for the other sort of political parties, and what's the atmosphere like there?
I would argue that the independence movement is fragmented. I think there is, when there's a lack of focus, there is a tendency to study your own navel, metaphorically speaking, and look for differences, look for arguments, look for divisions. When we went through 2018, 2019, it's not that long ago, the movement was absolutely united. We were marching in hundreds of thousands. Why? Because we'd been promised a referendum. Then the Sturgeon government said, we're going to give you a new referendum. It doesn't matter what Westminster says, we're going to give you a new referendum. Through 18 and 19, we were marching in Glasgow, we were marching in Edinburgh, 100,000. One of them even estimated a 200,000 turnout, whether it was that or whether it was 150. It was absolutely united around the purpose of independence because we had a focal point. I'm afraid the focal point is no longer there. The SNP has blown asunder. They have internally combusted. You now have what you've never had for decades. You now have a higher number of people who support independence than support the SNP. It used to be the other way around. You now have more people supporting independence than support the SNP. That is a clarion call to others in the independence movement, whether it's Alba under Alex Salmond, whether it's the ISP, whether it's the Greens. I don't get on particularly well with them, but there you go. Whether it's the remnants of the SNP, there needs to be a unity of purpose from all of the political parties, but even bigger than that, those not in political parties but who believe in the cause of independence. We need to keep our focus on the prize. And that means we need to have discussions. We need to have a constitutional convention that involves everybody, that has a big building where there are different banners, but there's a single purpose. So that you mentioned earlier, Radical Independence Convention, Hope Over Fear, Yes campaigns from all over the country. They all have to be told, you've got a place, you've got a purpose, you're part of this big campaign. But ultimately, in terms of delivering the independence, I now see no other route other than elections. So whether it be a Scottish Parliament election or a Westminster election, we need unity across all of the independence supporting parties and movements that 50% plus is the signal for independence. And if the Westminster thereafter declines to grant you that, we set up the Parliament. We declare it. Some people call it the Sinn Féin route. I would go down the Sinn Féin route. I wouldn't send anybody to Westminster any longer. Why send anybody to Westminster? It's absolutely useless. We had 56 get sent to Westminster. What did they do for Scotland? Hee-haw is what they did for Scotland. Absolutely Nothing. What we did is we got a lot of these fresh-faced, dewy-eyed SNP MPs who've been down there, and they've been doing on the back of the message, send us down here to settle up, not to settle down. Unfortunately, they forgot that message, and they all settled down. They all get their comfortable slippers on, and they were looking to go on X, Y, and Z committees, and they were looking to employ their families. They were looking at how big their pensions would be, and they forgot about their purpose. Independence. Didn't move us forward one single iota. That's why Westminster isn't the future for independence. For me, the future is you declare, you vote for us, you're voting us to get us out of Westminster, not to send anybody down to Westminster.
Aye, I wouldn't say it's the worst shout about no sending people down there, but I don't know if the public are going to go for that, to be honest. I think it's a hard sell. What about some of the arguments then? Like some of the big arguments that maybe the independence campaign got wrong? Like, what do you think those are? And what do you think will need to change in the new perspectives?
It's interesting. I had a dinner recently with Alec Salmond and discussed a couple of these things with Alec. And I'd say to Alec, I said, Alec, I was prepared to support your white paper as the basis for yes. But I used to always make a point at all of the meetings. I'd done 121 meetings during the referendum campaign, all parts of Scotland. And I used to always say, I've got three differences with the white paper. Number one, I'm not interested in keeping the pound. I want our own currency. We've got enough economically to satisfy the conditions for any currency across the world. We can back up with our oil and gas revenues, with our food and beverages production. Let's have our own currency.
So how does that work against the pound? Is it a one-for-one relationship? So we say we're taking the next amount of debt, £1 is worth one Scottish fucking whatever you call it, Alba.
We would have taken on, my opinion, we would have taken on the pound for a defined period. We would have stuck with the pound for a year to 2 years. We would have then moved to our own Scottish currency. That Scottish currency would be guaranteed by a Scottish bank, a Scottish investment bank, and our own economic performance. And all of the big economic forecasting units, whenever they give you a debt ratio and a debt level for Scotland, we are in the top 10 in the world because of our economic performances. So our currency would have been a strong currency. Alex's reply to me was, Tommy, the reason I talked about keeping the pound was because of the euro, because we were in the European Union, and the European Union wouldn't have recognised a different currency. They would have either told us to join the euro or stay with the pound. And that's why I developed that. He said it's not a problem any longer. We're not in Europe any longer. So the idea of our own currency is now an idea which has arrived. So it will be our own currency. I then said to him, I said, the other argument, Alec, was your position on the monarchy. I said, you know, more or less what you were telling us was we'll have a slimmed down monarchy. And I said to everybody I was speaking to, I'm not interested in putting the royal family on a diet. I just want rid of them. I don't want any of them to have any say over anything that happens democratically in Scotland. For me, the people are sovereign. And if the people are sovereign, there's no room for royal beverages or, royal yeses or noes. Every assent is what the word I'm looking for. Every law that's passed in Scotland, it needs to go royal assent. I'm sorry. The people vote MSPs into place. If the MSPs then vote for something, that's it. You should have sent something for royal assent. Well, I was going to say something, never mind that. But so I didn't want them on any diet, any slim fast. I just wanted rid of them.
Is that what's his position on that?
Well,
is he not a privy councillor?
Alex's position now, which is interesting, is, Tommy, I had some affection with the Queen. He said, actually, he's an older guy. He came from the north of Scotland. You're
not going to tell us they're winching here, are you?
He said that he had respect for the Queen. He says it doesn't exist now. He says I support a republic now. So that's his position, supports a republic. His party supports a republic. The Alba supports a republic. That's their position. That's why I'm a member of it. And then on the third issue, I used to always say to people, and by the way, I don't support remaining a member of the European Union. I think the European Union is a completely undemocratic institution, an anti-socialist institution. I've argued against it all of my adult political life. I don't want to be a member of the European Union, but what I want is Scotland to decide it. So I'm willing to accept what's in the white paper on the basis that once we're independent, I will want a referendum on whether we stay in the European Union, and then Scotland will make that decision. I'll be arguing for coming out. You can argue to stay in. I'll put my position, you put your position, and I'll accept it because Scotland will decide it. So that was my position. And as Alex said, well, that doesn't exist any longer either. And his position now is not to go into the European Union, but to join the European Fair Trade Agreement, EFTA, which is what Norway, Switzerland are happily involved with. And there is no wait list. You can join it immediately. So unlike if anybody did want to rejoin the European Union, you need to wait in a big queue and you need to go through all sorts of conditions. It's there. So in many respects, those big arguments, Paul, that you've identified, or I identified, but you agreed, because you talked about the currency being one of them, they don't exist any longer. We've actually moved on.
What about the one I'm surprised you never mentioned there was NATO?
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
Because obviously all this Angus Robertson carry-on's going on now, and like, people online are sort of insinuating that he was one of the movers and shakers who was sort of saying, you need to join NATO and you can't, take that off the table, which I would have thought you would have been.
It's a good one to mention. It very rarely came up during the referendum because it wasn't front and foremost, because the currency was a big issue. Then you had the European Union being a big issue because obviously the UK Independence Party at that time was pushing the whole idea of a referendum. So at the time of our referendum, those were bigger issues than NATO was. My position is absolutely categoric. I couldn't be in a party that supports membership of NATO, and Alba doesn't support membership of NATO. The SNP voted very narrowly with the intervention of Angus Robertson to support staying members of NATO, because for years and years the SNP was for withdrawal from NATO. I would argue that even the SNP, even the rump that remains of the SNP, I would argue that you'd be very pushed to get a support for remaining in NATO. Now, NATO has been revealed for what it always was. And by the way, Alex Salmond was very much at the forefront of revealing the nature of NATO during the Yugoslavian bombing. He was the one who said it was illegal. It was a disgrace. There was no legal basing whatsoever for the bombardment of Yugoslavia. But NATO did it. NATO is an aggressive, militaristic organisation that is the puppet of the United States of America. The United States of America uses NATO to get whatever it wants and to spread its imperialism. That's what anybody argues that's not the case simply hasn't read history. They're not paying attention at the back of the class. It's as simple as that. That's all NATO is. A militaristic organisation that exists to be the voice of American imperialism and the force of American imperialism. And when America can't get NATO to back something, they just do it anyway. That's what they did in Yugoslavia. That's what they did in Libya. There was no United Nations backing for bombing Yugoslavia. There's no United Nations backing for bombing Libya or Syria. But what did they do? They did it anyway. It's got to go.
What about something that did come up was this concept of the military. So obviously there's a lot of Scottish people who serve in like the British Army effectively. So how would we split that up? I think that's a difficult circle to square personally.
Yeah, it is. But it's actually an interesting debate that you can have within the independence movement and within Scotland. Personally, I'm probably on the edge. I mean, I love Cuba. I love what they do. They invest in health, they invest in education. They've got one of the best health and education systems in the whole wide world, despite being a country that's been economically blockaded since 1959 because of the revolution. America's tried to destroy them. They've failed miserably. But Cuba still has an army. They still have they don't export arms. They don't involve themselves in other military conflicts unless they're requested, as they were in Angola. From my point of view, they're a peacekeeping force. So in an independent Scotland, would we have a professional army? I would like to discuss it, but right now I would say yes in the interim, because in an independent Scotland, you couldn't rule out if, which is what we're going to do, we say we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, if we say we're going to take our oil and gas into public ownership. Every other country that's done that has been invaded by America. Whether it's Venezuela, Iran, they were invaded by America on the basis of government saying, oh, we're going to take over our own resources. Cuba, in terms of United Fruit Corporation, invaded. So, in that interim period, Paul, we probably need a defence force, and therefore we would need an army to organise that defence force. Whether that's a longer term project could remain to be seen. I would probably look more towards civil defence and everyone being involved and being prepared to defend what we've built in terms of a nation that can pride itself in being the best educated and the healthiest in the Western world, because we've invested so much in health and education. That's what I would want to defend. That's something worth defending. Right now, I don't think we've got much to defend, because poverty levels are going through the roof. The estimation, I was reading it was a Resolution Foundation report just the other day, estimating 400,000 more kids getting into poverty by the end of the Parliament. We've already got 1 in 3 kids in poverty, another 400,000. It's just not good enough.
Aye, no, I agree with that. And also, I think Ireland were an example. They're kind of similar to us in terms of size, and they obviously share a border with, as it's called here, Northern Ireland. And they've got some sort of army. I don't know what kind of size it is or what kind of stuff they get involved with, but they certainly can remain neutral everywhere. So maybe we could do something like that. It's up for debate, would be my sort of.
That's what I would say.
Take on it.
Paul, it's one of those areas. You know, it's a bit like somebody saying that you have to identify every single dot and comma before you change. Well, it's impossible to identify every single dot and comma, because some issues will come up that you hadn't even thought about. There are some issues that you can think about and you can debate, and the big issues, that the whole thing about pensions, the economy. But an issue like that, would we as a independent Scotland, I mean, take a concrete example. Scotland voted for independence in 2014. We've had 10 years of independence. We've developed our economy. We've kept a standing army. We've got rid of nuclear weapons. And Palestine is looking for some support. Would we as a government be willing to send military support to Palestine against the genocide that Israel's carrying out against it, instead of what the British government's doing, is sending aid to the genocide side? They're enabling genocide, they're supporting genocide, they're funding genocide. I'd like to think that in independent Scotland, we'd be the ones that'd be sending troops and aid to defend Palestine, because they're the ones in international law that are on the right side of the law. Israel is breaking every single international law. They've illegally occupied a country for 7 decades, but now they're illegally slaughtering children. What are we doing? Sending them guns to do it. There's a difference between what an independent Scotland could have done compared to what we are doing.
I would be surprised though, like if Scotland would be the first country in the world to take that stand, because there's bigger global players out there than us, you know, closer in proximity. So I would be surprised.
One thing we would do is we would have recognised Palestine.
As other countries,
as a sovereign country, as Spain, as Ireland, as Sweden have already done. But you know what? A lot of the times when these countries do these things, they become leaders for everybody else who's thinking about it. So if Scotland had been to the forefront of we're for peace, we're against genocide, We're against the slaughter of children. Who knows what these other European countries would have been forced to do, because if one country does something, other countries are going to be saying, the populations of other countries, I mean, let's face it, across the world, governments are out of touch with their people. Governments are on the side of Israel. The people, if you look at the demonstrations in every single city centre across the world, the people are with Palestine. Governments are with the Israeli lobby, which is a very, very powerful lobby indeed.
We spoke about that the last time, to be fair. And I'm in agreement with you. I don't disagree with any of that stuff.
Do you know, I found myself, Paul, I get criticised recently on X, understandably, because I've been a peacenik for decades. I've been arrested outside Faz Lane, arguing for us to recognise the criminality of nuclear weapons. So I've been quite vocal in my opposition to war and conflict and violence. But I get criticised recently because I'm now at the stage, and I'm not going to make an apology for it, I'm at the stage where I'm actually calling for the Irans of the world, for Hezbollah, for other players in the Middle East. I want them to attack Israel. I want them to militarily respond. I think Israel are a bunch of maniacal, murdering bastards. And words of condemnation mean fuck all to them now. For 9-10 months, we've condemned them. And it's not stopped a single Wayne getting torn to shreds. I want Iran, Hezbollah, Syria. I want them to attack them because I think it's the only way they'll get stopped. I think they're bullies, and I think they'll keep bullying until somebody stands up against them. I know the argument is it will lead to a conflagration, it could lead to a third world war. America will step in and support Israel. What does that mean then? Does that mean we should never have stood up against Hitler because we were worried that somebody else would have come in behind him? Do you take decisions because they're the right decisions? Or do you take decisions because you think it's the rational thing to do? You're worried about the consequences. Were we worried about the consequences of standing up with Hitler? Of course we were. Hitler could have won. There was times during the Second World War, by the way, if it wasn't for Russia, they would have won. People forget that, you know, we're supposed to hate Russia. If it wasn't for Russia, Hitler would have won the Second World War. It's just militarily a fact. But we got involved because it was the right thing to do. Right now, I utterly despise Saudi Arabia, Oman, United Arab Emirates for doing fuck all to defend Palestine on their doorstep, neighbours, doing nothing. So I can't keep saying do something and then not be prepared to explain what it is I think they should do, because do something, what do I mean? So people attack me for it, fine, I can understand where you're coming from, but am I going to back down on it? No, because I think people get involved in the Spanish Civil War. People went over and became recruits to defend the Republican government from the fascist hordes of Franco. They militarily defended something. I think we should militarily defend Palestine.
Aye, it's no, I know what you're saying. I understand your point completely. I think to go back to what you were saying earlier, though, Scotland was independent. Like, I think at the moment, diplomatically, we've not really got a seat at the table, and it seems like that table's not really working anyway. I think there is some sort of deal there now, apparently. It seems to be the sort of the argument, and the Israelis are having a general strike today. You will have seen this probably. I don't know if you've got any confidence in that making a difference.
I've some Israelis demonstrating, Paul, and some of them are demonstrating because Netanyahu is not doing enough. Some are demonstrating because he's not got the hostages out, not because he's slaughtered 40,000 people. See, when I say Israelis, and by the way, there are loads of them, loads of Jews across the world who are demonstrating against genocide. I applaud them. The Zionists, Zionism in Israel, they're not protesting because 20,000 children have been slaughtered. They're protesting because they don't have their hostages back. Where's the 10,000 hostages that Israel's holding Palestine? Why are they not returning them? So, I don't have any confidence whatsoever in the talks that they're having. 10 months of talking has got us absolutely nowhere. People in Israel, with the support of the army, the settlers go in and steal more land. They've spread the settlements during this last 10 months. They blockade aid trucks. What type of inhumane, utter moron do you have to be to stop food and water and medicine getting to people in refugee camps who are living in tents because their houses have been bombed? That's what they're doing, mate. That's not me making it up, it's fact. I think they should be attacked. I would take out their electricity, their energy production. I would attack not civilian targets, military targets, legitimate military targets. If we don't, we're just going to keep talking, and Waynes are going to keep dying. That's just the way it is. I think as a world, mate, I'm ashamed as a person that we've witnessed what's been on in the last 10 months. It's been there, it's the most publicised genocide in the world, and yet it's the most denied genocide in the world. And many people don't have the balls, don't have the courage to actually stand up and condemn it. I think the days of condemnation have gone. It needs to be action now.
Do you ever worry? You've obviously got the rally coming up in a couple of weeks, as we talked about earlier, like about the numbers. Is there ever any anxiety about that?
In terms of turnout at rallies, Hope Over Fear has been doing it for 10 years. We've had 20,000 in the square, 15,000. There were the days when Jerry Cinnamon came along. We used to give Jerry a stage at a time when he wasn't known. Lovely guy, big independent supporter. I think his management team got involved to say, you need to cut all that. And we've had less than 1,000 in the square. The Declaration of Growth talks about as long as there's 100. That's good enough for me, Paul. As long as there's 100 of us. There'll be more than that. But the point I'm making is the numbers who attend is not the be-all and end-all. It's the fact that the cause remains foremost. We will have people coming to George Square on Saturday, 14th September, from 12 o'clock. We will have live music, fantastic artists who all give up their time, free of charge, come and entertain people for nothing. Some of their entertainment is fabulous. We'll have speakers like Angus MacNeil, former MP, Alex Salmond. We have got individuals from across the independence movement. We've invited other groups to come. We've got representatives of the Scottish Palestine campaign coming. We are trying to get the grandson of Nelson Mandela, who has got links with the Scottish Palestine campaign, who they're trying to get visas to come over, and if we're successful, he'll be speaking. And for me, what's important is if we got 100 or 100,000, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we're there and we're saying loud and clear, the dream never dies. We'll never give up.
Aye, no, fair play. And there's another protest as well. I forgot to mention this earlier on the 7th. A sort of, I don't know how you describe it, a sort of refugee sort of solidarity thing, you know, a sort of counter-protest. I think some of the far right and maybe try to organise something. I don't know how successful they'll be, but hopefully that'll be well attended as well.
Yeah,
you might get
Saturday
some people.
the 7th, there was supposed to be, I was invited to speak at Edinburgh at the All Under One Banner Independence rally, and I contacted All Under One Banner and made it absolutely clear to them that I wouldn't be attending Edinburgh because Tommy Robinson fascist, racist little prick had called for a protest in Glasgow's George Square, and we should not give these people any free rein to assemble and spew out their filth and their racism and their fascism. And I said, I won't be in Edinburgh, I'll be in Glasgow. And as far as I was concerned, all under one banner should postpone and divert their supporters to Glasgow as well. I think, understandably, there was a wee bit of discussion about that because of the amount of time and resources put in to organising the event. But eventually they've agreed, so all under one banner's demonstration has been postponed. I know the trade union movement, anti-racist groups, independence campaigns have all said we need to turn up Glasgow 7th of September and we need to say no to racism, no to fascism, because regardless of any political differences we have, we're united against fascism and racism.
Aye, I can't think of a better way to end it than that, Tommy, mate. Again, thanks very much for coming in and good luck. Cheers, mate.